Juan had always believed in the American dream. He worked hard, served his country, survived 2 war campaigns and retired from the military with a modest pension, and built a life with his wife Mary in a quiet Southern California suburb. Their home, with its manicured lawn and blooming plants, was sanctuary. The aroma of Mary's and daughter's baking often filled the air. He cherished evenings spent with his 2 children, teaching his son to play catch and tending chickens with his daughter. Life wasn't perfect. The spark in his marriage had dimmed over the years, his needs replaced by a simmering tension he couldn't quite place. Still, he clung to the belief that their connection, like the sturdy persimmon tree in their backyard, would weather any storm. Juan had a routine. He would wake on the weekends in the bright Southern California sun, pour himself a cup of coffee, and step out into the stillness of the garden to avoid conflict. The garden was his sanctuary, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of nature. He'd feel the soft earth between his fingers, smell the dew-kissed leaves, and listen to the crows flying overhead. He found solace in nurturing his plants, watching them grow and thrive under his care. It was a stark contrast to the growing unease he felt within the walls of his home. Evenings were a time for family. Juan would return from his job at the local hardware store, greeted by the excited squeals of joy from children as he arrived home from work. Dinner was a lively affair, filled with the clatter of forks and the chatter of his family. Later he played with his kids in the backyard, sharing stories of the importance of being self-sustaining. He would plant sunflowers with them, and Rejoice spoke about the dangers of pesticides and the importance of bees. These moments, filled with laughter and love, were what kept him going. They were the bright spots in a life that was slowly unraveling. Despite the growing distance between him and Mary, Juan held on to hope. He believed they could work through their problems, despite her feelings of entitlement, and Juan hoped to rekindle the flame that had once burned so brightly. Even if their conversations were often strained and nasty, she called him damaged goods and filthy, and their arguments became more frequent. He clung to the belief that their shared history, the life they had built together, meant something. He was determined to hold on for his kids, to mend the cracks that threatened to shatter their world. Juan found solace in the familiar. He spent hours in his garden, his hands working the soil, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. The feel of the cool earth, the scent of freshly turned soil, the vibrant colors of his flowers, these were his anchors. Each seed he planted, each bud that unfurled was a testament to hope, a reminder that even in darkness, life finds a way. He'd often sit on a weathered bench, watching bees flit among the blossoms, finding a strange peace in their tireless industry, thinking of old friends that were lost in combat. The garden was his therapy, a place where he could silence the noise in his head and just be. When the weight of his worries became too much, Juan would reach for his phone. He'd dial a number he knew by heart, the familiar rhythm of the ring's a lifeline. On the other end, a gruff voice would answer, "Yeah?" It was Chiomento, his old buddy from his army days. They'd talk for hours, reminiscing about their time in service, sharing stories, and offering each other support. Chiomento, with his no-nonsense advice and unwavering loyalty, was a rock for Juan. Sometimes it wasn't words that brought comfort, but simply the sound of another voice. Juan would listen to Chiomento talk about his family, his woodworking projects, the mundane details of his day-to-day life, foxhole humor and locker room banter. It was a welcome distraction from Juan's own troubles, a reminder that there was a world outside of his own pain. These phone calls were more than just conversations, they were a lifeline. They reminded Juan that he wasn't alone, that even in the darkest of times there were people who cared. Chiomento's unwavering support, his ability to make Juan laugh even when he felt like he had nothing left to smile about, was a beacon of hope. These calls were a reminder that even though his world was falling apart, there were still pieces of it worth fighting for. The argument began innocently enough. Juan had forgotten to pick up groceries, a simple oversight that sparked a torrent of accusations from Mary. He stood there, taking it, the words washing over him like a cold shower. He was tired, bone-tired, from working double shifts to make ends meet. He just wanted peace. He tried to explain. Juan felt like a plow horse, a human ATM, but Mary wouldn't listen. Her voice rose, sharp and shrill, echoing through their once happy home. Juan felt a familiar tightness in his chest, a pressure that had been building for months. He knew this dance, the accusations, the blame, the feeling of being backed into a corner. This time, though, something felt different. Maybe it was the way Mary looked at him, her eyes filled with a cold fury he hadn't seen before. Or perhaps it was the finality in her voice when she said, "I can't live like this anymore." Juan called her fat and lazy. He retreated to the garden, seeking solace in the familiar. As he knelt among his roses, he heard a noise. Mary was at the edge of the porch, her face illuminated by the cold blue light of her phone. He saw her speaking, her voice tight with anger. He couldn't hear the words, but he didn't need to. Juan lashed out, indicating that he wanted a divorce. He knew in his gut that something was terribly wrong and this relationship was affecting his mental health. Later that night, as Juan lay in bed, the silence deafening, Mary snuck out with the kids and there was a pounding on the door. He stumbled out of bed, his heart pounding. Through the peephole, he saw 2 police officers, their faces grim. They were there for him. Mary had hired a lawyer and called the police, accusing him of verbal abuse and threats of violence. He was being served with a domestic violence restraining order. The flimsy piece of paper felt like a punch to the gut. It was a lie, a complete fabrication, but in that moment it was his reality. Section 4. Exile, locked out and cast aside. The restraining order was a life-altering document. It was a one-sided decree, issued without Juan having a chance to defend himself. It banished him from his own home, the place where he had built a life, a family. The officers were professional, but their expressions spoke volumes. They looked at him with a mixture of pity and suspicion, a look that made him feel like a criminal in his own home. He was allowed to collect a few essential belongings, his movements watched closely by the officers. Each item he packed, a toothbrush, a change of clothes, a framed photo of his children, felt like a shard of glass piercing his heart. As he was escorted out, he glanced back at his home, the lights glowing warmly in the darkness. It was a cruel reminder of everything he had lost. The order meant he couldn't contact Mary or his children. She was now under the control of lawyers promising her a portion of his pension, alimony, home, cars and kids. Juan was cut off from the people he loved most, left to grapple with the devastating consequences of false accusations. His world had been turned upside down, his life reduced to a single piece of paper that labeled him a danger to his own family. The injustice of it all was suffocating. He grew hate toward the commissioner who signed the order, and the lawyers that groomed her. The loss of his Second Amendment rights was another blow. A veteran, Juan had always believed in responsible gun ownership. His firearms were securely locked away, a reminder of his service and a symbol of protection. Now they were another casualty of the accusations against him. He felt stripped bare, his rights eroded, his character assassinated. The system he had sworn to protect had turned against him, leaving him feeling betrayed and utterly alone. Section 5. Living a nightmare, the weight of injustice. Juan found himself adrift in a sea of uncertainty. He was forced to live in his car, then move into a cramped, dingy apartment, a far cry from the home he had lovingly cared for. The walls felt like they were closing in on him, the silence deafening without the sounds of his children's laughter. Every surface seemed to mock him with memories of happier times. Sleep was a luxury he could no longer afford. Nightmares plagued him, vivid and relentless, replaying the events that led to his exile. He would wake up in a cold sweat, his heart pounding, the weight of his situation crushing him. The injustice of it all was a bitter pill to swallow. He had always played by the rules, worked hard, and served his country with honor. Now he was being punished for a crime he didn't commit. The legal fees were staggering. At $350 an hour, it was draining his meager savings. Decades of hard-fought wealth was slowly transferring from his children to lawyers' pockets. Further, he is responsible for Mary's legal fees and all household expenses as well. The system was slowly bleeding Juan out. As a result, he was forced to pick up extra shifts at work and drove nights as an Uber driver to survive the onslaught, a form of modern-day slavery. Juan was exhausted to say the least. The emotional toll was immeasurable. The pain of being separated from his children was unbearable. He missed their laughter, their hugs, their bedtime stories. He worried about their well-being, their emotional state. The thought of them being told lies about him, of them believing he had hurt their mother, was more than he could bear. She was slowly poisoning the well. He felt like a failure, a burden, a shadow of his former self. In the aftermath of the turmoil, Juan finds himself alone, grappling with the weight of his shattered dreams. The once vibrant suburban oasis now feels like a haunting reminder of what was lost. As the days turn into nights, the silence becomes unbearable. and Juan realizes that some wounds may never heal, but in the darkest of times, a glimmer of hope can often be found. One evening, as he sits by the window of his cramped apartment, Juan receives an unexpected phone call. It's an old friend from his military days, someone who had heard about his plight and wanted to offer support. The conversation is a lifeline, a reminder that he is not completely alone in this battle. Encouraged by the call, Juan decides to seek out a support group for falsely accused individuals. There, he finds a community of people who understand his pain, who have faced similar injustices. Slowly, he begins to rebuild his sense of self, finding solace in shared experiences and mutual support. The story ends with a poignant reflection on the fragility of happiness and the enduring pain of injustice. Southern California's court system is hostile to men. Men are pigs to be slaughtered in family court. Juan discovers that government creates the problem, then charges for solutions. That is how they remain relevant and justify the expenditures of your tax dollars. Juan's journey will take 3 to 5 years, all the while paying legal fees, monitored visitation with kids, and court costs. It is far from over, but he is no longer adrift in a sea of uncertainty. With the support of his newfound community, he starts to see a path forward, one step at a time. The enduring pain of his separation from his children remains, but now there is a flicker of light in the darkness, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming hardship, the human spirit can find a way to endure and eventually to heal.